Hello, welcome to the Blame Game. I'm Maria Armstrong from Pax8, and I'm joined by.
Nathan from Pax8 Academy, APAC as well.
It's been a little while since we've had a catch up and talk about the fun and challenges of communication between sales and service. So I think, Nathan, you had an interesting question to ask today.
Yeah, it's a scenario I've seen a few times of late and over the past. You're in the projects team, you get a signed off project, but you don't know how long it's going to take or what's involved. By what's involved, I mean the statement of work just says 40 hours of professional services, data migration, something like that, and that's it for your project scope. I was curious, from your perspective, Maria, with your experiences managing sales teams and setting up sales processes, is that good enough from a expectations point of view with the client, as well as expectation for the project team, as well as something to fall back on as proof of targets for what the project should be delivering?
I mean, it requires a deeper investigation. So, firstly, have you got a sales rep who's managing to walk into clients and saying, give me 40 hours worth of money for an unknown project with no definition? It's not a bad sales rep from that perspective, in the fact that clients are just walking over thousands and thousands of dollars for no defined anything. On the one hand, this is the selling ice to Eskimos. Their client doesn't need it because they don't even know what they're paying for. Is that good for your business? Not at all, because the client doesn't know what they are getting. They don't know what they've just forked over thousands of dollars for, and the team doesn't know what they're delivering. So with nobody knowing anything, it's likely to end in disaster.
Maybe not disaster, but it's not a long game.
No, that's right. Definitely
you can't do that
communication
4 or
breakdown.
5 times. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't make somebody happy if they don't actually know what they're even buying. So then I guess the other question is, did the sales rep actually define what they were selling to the client and not communicate that back to the project team? Yeah, perhaps that's the case. In which case you can go to the sales rep and say, what did you communicate with the client? What did you actually sell to the client?
Yeah, and I agree that it's more than likely that they have had these conversations. They just haven't thought it important enough to write down or include in a signed statement of work, which is essentially what a contract that you've just signed saying you're going to deliver these things outlined. Probably not the best position to be in for the start of the project, but there probably is that context. So what I usually suggest, quite in line with what you're saying, is go back to the account manager or the salesperson who sold it, and you could be having that conversation of, I'm not going to start this project until I know what it is that we're delivering. So you need to help me define what it is, and you need to also communicate what it is in writing to the client. Would you recommend something like that as well, so that you've got something to back up what you've just sent and had signed?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't go back to the client and say, actually, we've just done the scope and we underquoted or we undersold, because it's not a quote, it's a sale. But you can say to the client, we're setting out the timeline of delivery for you. You could, instead of saying we made a terrible mistake, which isn't a good first step in a project with a client, doesn't build that trust. You can go back and say, now that you've signed, now that you've paid, here's the timeline of events, that we're delivering for you, and then build the processes around that. I mean, if we're talking projects, they should be scoped. We've discussed this. The sales rep should be, it's either the sales rep scoping them or having the projects team scoping them, depending on the technical ability of your sales team, depending on the technical aspects of the project,
complexity and whatnot.
Yeah. So all of those things. I mean, if it's the same sort of project, migrating data, and we know that we have a specific price and package for projects, then the sales reps should be able to scope them out based on, within reason, and get them checked.
Where I've often seen it happen is that they'll go to an engineer that they like and say, hey, how long do you reckon this will take? And that's the information that's given, and they'll go 40 hours. Don't really have all the context or the information. It doesn't go through any kind of internal QA, because engineers often grossly underscope things because they want to keep people happy, and they think that the client won't pay for anything. So that happens, and all that just gets thrown over, lose complete sight of context of it. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line, it's been signed off, comes in, that engineer who provided that high-level estimate without all the information, no one knows who that was that did that or why they did it, and now you've got no defined project you're meant to be delivering, and you're meant to be doing it starting tomorrow. It's a interesting one, because I know some places still work in that manner and want to work in that manner, or work in the manner of, I reckon it's just going to be this much, based off top of just a thumb in the air kind of estimate. It's going to be 40 hours, and the way that they work around it is that they'll add in like $20 20% contingency, so they'll add another $20, $40, whatever it is, to their projects, hourly rate, say this is how much it's going to cost. What's an interesting activity that you can do based also off what you said is actually rescope the project after it's been sold and you have some information, and you might work out that that 40-hour project is actually a 60-hour project, and now you've added that additional rate, and your people might be 200 plus an hour, as opposed to 180 as an example. But now when you calculate it based off it being a 60-hour project and work out the hourly rate, you're actually, even though you've thought that you've calculated it at a $200 plus price, it's actually closer to 140 now, because you've had to stretch that budget over more hours. Quite an interesting activity to do, and have something to report back on.
And every hour additional that it takes is, dropping that hourly rate.
Yeah, exactly.
You can go back as well. I mean, I'm a big fan of having the data and having the history. And if you've done this in the past, you can actually go back and assess the accuracy. I mean, if you want to run the business with that style of quoting, that's fine, as long as you know that your accuracy is spot on. So, I mean, there are people who say, but I don't want to change how I do things. Then don't change how you do things, but have the data to back up your decision making. So go back and look at the last dozen projects you've done, go back and look at the last year's worth of projects and say, if I estimated 40 hours for each of these projects, was I under or over? How much money did I lose? And recalculate that. Pop it in a spreadsheet. Have a look at the numbers. Obviously not something we recommend to sell projects with no scoping. But if you have clients who say, here, have $10,000 to do an unknown project, that's a pretty good relationship, trusting relationship with your clients, as long as you're continuing to deliver.
Yeah, I agree with you. Go back with the data. So at your project closeout, for instance, you could be looking at the accuracy of what your scope was, in terms of how much the estimated budget was versus how much was spent. Often, maybe not often, but regularly enough, I've seen it where places are actually losing money on projects and they don't know it, until you start looking at the data. And then it's a conversation of, are you happy to be paying organizations to be doing projects for them? Because, effectively paying your clients to be your friend. which isn't a business model.
It's one way. It's one way to get your friends.
Yeah.
Costly, very, very costly way to get friends. I like the idea of looking at history to learn how we plan the future. You can do the same if you decide that you want to start scoping projects. You can do the same by looking at your historical projects to help build a scope. And if you're doing similar projects, like I said, if it's migration of data and it's a similar project every time, you can actually package that and have a fairly stock standard package, X number of users, X number of data would be this many dollars. It's a quick calculation. And it doesn't need a full scoping project, a full scope for the project. But you've packaged it up.
Yeah. My takeaway would be a good starting point with the hours would be, and working out your scoping, is to actually look at your data. So maybe over the last 3 months, if you're using a PSA, have a look at what the fixed price budget was. If you're using fixed price budgeting, this general what we're talking about is more based around this anyway. Time and materials, it's here or there a lot of the time. Look at what your fixed price was though, and then divide that by the total actual hours that were spent on the project, and work out what, as a starting point, work out what your hourly rate is across each project, because that could be quite an interesting activity to have a look at to start with, because you should have a rough idea of what an hourly cost is for each staff member to actually be employed in your business. Often we'll look at how much dollars came in, and we'll look at dollars in revenue and go, oh, well, it was $10,000. Great, we made $10,000. But did you actually make $10,000 at $100 an hour when the labor burden cost of your staff is $120 an hour, which effectively means that you've lost $20 an hour?
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that, this is probably a discussion for another time, but time allocation by project teams against projects is 100% accurate?
No, that's the other thing. So you do need to, as I was saying, and we've talked about this before, I'm pretty sure. I'm talking about it all the time. What can happen when a project's set up to fail? I think we talked about this in the first thing, is engineers will start putting their time elsewhere, or they just won't put their time in, because there's that element again of you want to do a good job, want to make the client happy, want to keep everyone else happy. Let's work around what the issues are. So again, part of this is having very, very open and honest conversations and behaviors driving it. So yeah, our project is going to be over by 20, 30 hours. But if, for instance, you did that scoping activity after it sold and you worked out that it was going to be 20 or 30 hours over anyway, you can have that conversation with the team. Hey, we're expecting it to go over, or we're expecting it to be this much, or don't even tell them you're expecting it to be this much, but just say, hey, it is what it is. If we go over, we go over. See what happens. See if you're starting to see some alignment there between what happens if you're using actual scoping practices. Is it more accurate than what's happening with that, thumb in the air approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And if you're looking at the historical data, consider whether your team might have been allocating time differently when you're calculating your profit and loss from previous projects. Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like a good exercise for people to go away and have a look at and see, to close out the last 4 months of the year successfully. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Good catch up.